I get a lot of messages from people who are frustrated about someone else's use of social media.
So true. Oh my goodness. I hear this so often. I know exactly where you're going with this.
And of course, there's so much support in our world today for people who are frustrated about their overuse of their device. And we hear a lot of blame of the device in our world today. And therefore, people with this habit of blaming their device may not even give it more thought because they would
Mhm.
just accept that explanation. So, in your book, Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, maybe you have a different approach. So, I'm curious to hear your solution.
Yeah, so I actually started with this line of thinking. I remember there was one real seminal moment in my life when I had to reconsider my relationship with distraction. I was with my daughter one afternoon, and we just had some daddy-daughter time. And we had this activity book of different things that dads and daughters could do together, like do a Sudoku puzzle, have a paper airplane throwing contest, all kinds of fun little activities. And I remember one of the activities was to ask each other this question: if you could have any superpower, what superpower would you like? And I remember that question verbatim, but I can't tell you what my daughter said because in that moment, for whatever reason, I just thought it was a good idea to just check my email real quick. And before I knew it, she was gone because she saw the very clear message that I was sending by checking my phone as opposed to being fully present with her. And she left the room and went to go play with some toy outside. And I blew it. And I realized I blew it. And so my initial reaction was, well, it's the phone's fault, right? Look, here I'm using the phone. I'm not with my daughter. It must be the phone's fault. And so I realized I had to reassess my own relationship with distraction at that moment. Because if I'm honest with you, Loretta, it wasn't just with my daughter. It would happen when I say I was going to exercise and eat right, but I didn't and I wouldn't. It would happen when I say, oh, I'm going to work on that big project, and then I procrastinate again and again. So I really decided then and there that I had to dive deep into this problem. And so the way I solve my own problems is typically I will talk to my wife about it. I'll read some books about it. And all the books I read on this topic basically said the same thing: get rid of the technology. It's the technology's fault. And so I believe them. And I actually experimented with many of the techniques that these books tell you to do. I got rid of my smartphone. I got a flip phone from Alibaba, the kind we used to use in the 1990s with no internet connection, just sends messages and phone calls.
Mhm.
And I got rid of my computer and I just decided to just do my work on a word processor, again from the 1990s, no internet connection. And so I would sit down and I would say, okay, now I'm going to get to work. Nothing's going to distract me. I'm going to be purely focused. Here I go. But there's that book on the shelf I've been meaning to read, or let me just clean up my desk real quick, or let me just take out the trash for a quick minute. And what I found was that I kept getting distracted because the problem wasn't the stuff outside of me, right? I'll tell you what the problem really was in a second. So when I found that all the other books on this topic that give this ridiculous rationale of, well, get rid of the technology. By the way, all these books that give that advice, they're all written by tenured professors who can't get fired. So thanks a lot. Nice for you to say stop using your technology, but the most of us will get fired from our jobs if we stop using these technologies. So I didn't find that to be a very practical or helpful solution because I kept getting distracted by one thing or another. So I decided to really go to first principles. I wanted to figure out who was the first person to talk about distraction as a modern dilemma. And you know when people started talking about distraction for the first
I
time
want to
was it
guess that
was
it was a drug company.
no, before
No?
that. Okay, so it
Oh,
wasn't social media. It wasn't the television. It wasn't the radio. It was you got to keep going back way, way back.
wasn't
It wasn't
wasn't the
drugs.
drug companies that were
Nope, it
trying.
wasn't drugs. Even before that, Plato, the Greek
Oh,
philosopher,
okay. Okay.
2,500 years ago,
Mhm.
talked about akrasia in the Greek, the tendency to do things against our better interest. And so
Mhm.
that's really when a light bulb went off for me. And then I realized, you know what? Distraction is not something that our technology has just suddenly created, because if for people have been talking about it for 2,500 years before the internet, it can't be something that's caused by our devices. There has to be something about the human condition. And I think it's a really fascinating question: that why is it that despite knowing what to do, as Plato asked, why don't we just do it? So this is part of our DNA. This is part of the human condition. Part of being a grown-up, folks, is taking some personal responsibility and
Yeah.
realizing the problem isn't with this stuff outside of us, because it's
Yeah.
always been the case. It's about what's happening inside our own heads.
Yeah.
And so that's really what,
Yeah, we have
yeah.
a desire for rewards, and we have a desire for short run rewards, and we have a desire to avoid threat. So if the task that you want to do does not feel like it's going to be rewarding in the short run, or if it makes you nervous because you linked it to a past threat, then your mind just goes somewhere else. And then that becomes a big pathway in your brain, and you just flow there without conscious awareness. But
Right. And so
I,
what I realized was that distraction, it's not a moral failing. It's not a techno crisis. It shouldn't be a moral panic. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. It's simply an emotion regulation issue. But most of us have never been taught how to deal with boredom, uncertainty, anxiety, fatigue, stress. We don't know how to deal with those very natural, uncomfortable sensations, and so we don't learn how to deal with them. We look to how to escape them. And so what
And
do we
we're
escape them
also
with?
advised that it's a disorder and that a pill
Exactly.
can fix it. And if you grow up in that generation that's told that it's a disorder and a pill can fix it, and I could get hate mail for this, for anyone who thinks it's a disorder and the pill has fixed it, go for it. But it's not really the universal thing. There is a
Oh my goodness.
universal ability to control your attention, and it has to be learned because babies are not born with control over their attention.
I think we are definitely cut from the same cloth. A lot of ADHD practitioners and coaches use my book. I didn't write the book for people with ADHD, but a lot of people who suffer from ADHD and ADHD coaches use my methodology because we're seeing a real shift here. The pendulum is swinging the other way. My mantra when it comes to neurodiversity and ADHD and these type of disorders, it's always skills before pills. Skills for
That's
before
great.
pills, for
Very
God's sakes, right? Especially with children, we pump them up with medication. We diagnose the hell out of everyone. Doesn't matter if you will go to a practitioner and you say, I'm distracted, they're going to give you a diagnosis 99.9% of the time. And it is a travesty. We will look back in a generation and say, what the hell were we thinking? Not that some people don't have ADHD. ADHD is definitely real, but it is way overdiagnosed. Way more people could get the benefits that they get from the pills, if not more so, because we're seeing many of them are no better than placebos, if they learn these fundamental skills to become indistractable.
Yeah. So the 99% you said that come out with a prescription, just to put it in perspective, I want to say that it's not always the healthcare practitioner that is pushing it. Some of the time it
Mm,
is, but some of the time it's the family pushing them. And some of the time it's the school administration pushing the family.
bingo.
Yes,
Exactly. Because
exactly.
this
So
people
those,
don't realize the schools have an economic incentive to diagnose your child as having some condition. People don't realize this. The
yes, they
incentives
get
are
extra
completely
compensation.
perverse,
Exactly.
completely messed up. And our children are the ones who suffer the consequences.
Yes, it's terrible. So, can I ask how old was your daughter when this first incident happened?
She would have been about 9 years old.
Okay, good, good. So
Mm.
she was not yet the one who was ignoring you by looking at her phone, right? No?
Uh, well, I struggle to answer that a little bit because now she's 15
Yeah.
and she doesn't struggle with ignoring me because of distraction and technology at all.
Oh,
So,
good, good, good.
yeah.
Okay, well, I have to say that my daughter is close to your age. And
Mm,
so I was the one that grew up with like I'm sitting there at the table with you and you're just reading. Well, like I'm just sitting here and you're
mm.
just, I couldn't even believe it. Like it's so insulting when like you're right there sitting with someone and then you see that, of course, they all do it to each other. So I guess it becomes socially acceptable. But again,
Yeah.
it's new etiquette that people have to form of are we doing this or are we not doing this?
It's a great point. And in fact, I remember when I taught at Stanford at the Graduate School of Business and later at the Hasselplatter Institute of Design. And I remember when I first started teaching there, this was about 2012 when I started teaching there. And I remember my first few cohorts of students, there were a lot of people in the middle of my lecture that would be on their phones. And I saw it was very interesting. As time went by, people started to learn what was appropriate and inappropriate behavior. Back in 2012, the iPhone was what, 4 years old, right? So it was still pretty new and people were learning how to deal with these devices. But now it's amazing. I just gave a lecture yesterday and there was nobody in the audience using their phone, not even a single person. I used to see almost the entire audience on their phones, even when I would talk about distraction. And what's happened is we've spread what's called social antibodies. It's not the young people that tend to be the problem. It's interesting. When I give a presentation at a corporation and they hire me and they pay my fee and I come in and I'm going to teach them how to be indistractable and they get them all together in a conference room, guess who's using their phone? Is it the Gen Y? No, it's the boomer in the back of the room, the big boss that's got this big important email. He constantly has to show everybody how important he is or she is at the back of the room. That's who tends to use the device because they haven't gotten the message that that's rude, that that's inappropriate behavior. And so what we start seeing actually among young people is they'll do this in front of their parents, right? It's called snubbing, phone snubbing, right? So phone snub, fubbing is this portmanteau that's been put together. Phone snubbing is fubbing. They'll fub their parents, but they won't fub each other. When they're together, they want to interact. In fact, it's funny. You can hear people. Sometimes I'll overhear conversations among my daughter's peers. And they say, "Oh yeah, I was with this guy, and he did nothing but use his phone. What a loser! Like it's
Good, good.
become not cool
Yes,
to get so
yes.
into your phone." And so those type of norms, spreading those social antibodies, I think that's going to happen naturally. My job, I think, is to facilitate that so it happens faster. I want that to accelerate.
So let's say that you're a parent or a coworker, and this person in your life, not that you perceive it as rude, but they're really failing to get things done.
Mm.
And they have accepted that indoctrination of their own lack of responsibility for their own brain. And they're like, well, I can't stop. It's not my fault. It's the manufacturer of these phones and apps. So give us a short way for a person to respond to this person in their life who gives them the not my fault speech.
Well, I really hesitate to try and help people change others. I'm
Yeah,
a
yeah,
big
yeah.
philosopher. I'm a big believer in the bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. So I think the best thing you can do if you're trying to influence someone else in your life is to lead by example. I can't tell you how many parents I have worked with over the years who tell me, my kid is always on Fortnite. They're always on TikTok. They'll never get off. And meanwhile, they're telling me this as they're sending email or checking Facebook. Like it doesn't work that way. Children come pre-installed with these invisible antennae. You can't see them. They're called the hypocrisy detection device. And they're always scanning around to see where you are messing up. So we as parents, if you want to raise indistractable kids, you have to be indistractable yourself as a parent. You have to set that example.